What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video I'm going to be giving you a list of tips, tricks, and loadout and build suggestions for every character in this comprehensive solo flawless guide for the new dungeon, Ghosts of the Deep. I've been putting in the work the last couple days testing a myriad of DPS strats and build types on all three characters so that I can help you get a solo flawless playing whatever playstyle you prefer. Now, I am going to assume that you have done the dungeon, so I will not be going into direct mechanics in this guide, but I will be giving tips on how to do those mechanics quickly and efficiently. This solo run can definitely be a bit of a grind. My solo flawless clear took me just over an hour and 20 minutes. The bosses have a lot of health, so maximizing on your DPS will be crucial, especially on the final boss when it can take between 5 and 10 minutes just to get to DPS. Anyways, enough preamble, let's get to the first encounter. This encounter requires you to touch 4 runes in the center. You have to run all over the map to do this. Ogres spawn to show you the path to head, and now, even though the paths are random, once you find that first rune, that path follows a usual pattern. So once you know the pathing of this area, you can rip through it. The best way to learn it is by doing it, but you will get the pattern down in just a few runs, I'm sure. For this dungeon specifically, I would honestly recommend doing a few practice runs to get your strats and DPS sorted out. I spent 5 hours on each boss yesterday and today testing loadouts and builds, so I will tell you what I recommend so that you don't have to do the same. You can just choose a recommendation and practice optimizing that strat instead. I will give a few suggestions for each class as I know some people prefer different playstyles, but for the opening encounter, here's what I suggest. I used an Eager Edge sword for getting around quickly and a Bonk Titan. If you don't know the Bonk Titan playstyle, it absolutely wrecks in this dungeon. The wizards have solar shields, and with Syntheseps, you are able to dispatch them very easily with just one hammer. So that brings me to my first time save tip. You don't need to kill all the enemies at this part. You can simply kill the wizards and they will reveal the path to the next symbol. So take them out as quickly as possible and move to the next symbol. The first wave spawns 2 wizards, the second wave spawns 4, and the final wave spawns a Lucent Hive. What I did on my Titan was I would quickly bonk the 4 wizards and get to the Lucent Hive spawn. Then I would pop my hammer super and melt everything easily. Finish the ghost, and then you have Vestige of Light for 1 minute and 20 seconds, meaning you have that long to kill the wizard in the middle and dunk the corresponding rune. Which brings me to another point. Remember the rune of the Lucent Hive that you just killed. In the opening encounter, these runes stay visible, but in the final boss, they disappear once you finish the ghost. So come up with a system that works for you to remember what symbol you have to hit. And once you've done this 4 times, you are done. For character-specific loadouts, I recommend Bonk Hammer for Titan. We'll go over these builds more in depth at the end of the video, or you can jump to the timestamp below if you're interested in seeing what that build is specifically. Invis Hunter is also decent, especially if you're running Devour. Arc Hunter with Assassin's Cowl is honestly the best thing to run in this whole dungeon in my opinion, so that would get my vote. And for fun, honestly, Ophidius Spathe is really good. You get 2 knives, and you get them both back with a kill or a dodge if you're running Gambler's Dodge and you're running Ember of Torches. And this will make you radiant the whole time. You can run a healing grenade with Ember of Empyrean to give yourself constant healing, and this build works wonders because there are a ton of adds and the ignitions destroy them quickly. And for Warlock, Controverse Hold and Devour is always a great option, especially with a good commemoration and volatile rounds. And Sunbracer's Warlock also goes extremely hard. That is what I used, and it worked great. For weapons, I used a Solar Slug shotgun, shout out to Sojourner's Tale. I also use Quicksilver Storm. The grenades that you get can take down the ogres super easily with this weapon. Xenophage completely wrecks, and it will kill the wizards in 1 shot, but the ammo economy is a bit of a concern. But I would recommend building into abilities over weapons. Bonk Titan, Sunbracer's Warlock, and Assassin's Cowl Hunter will do you extremely well here. I also have guides on the Arc Hunter and Solar Warlock builds if you're interested, but again, I'll detail them at the end of the video. From there, we go to an extremely long traversal section. Now, this is the first dungeon to come out since Bungie's changes to the fall damage system. Basically, you can no longer die to bullshit physics. It will just leave you 1 shot. But for the long drop downs, there are no enemies here to finish you off. So after my solo flawless when I was doing more testing, I tested this by free falling every jump, and I can confirm that I never died once. So you can breathe a sigh of relief knowing you won't die to anything dumb. As for the route to take and whatnot, again, this just comes with practice. The more you run it, the more efficient you'll get. There are lots of air bubbles, so you should be fine. One big tip that I found out when I ran it back on my Hunter is holy crap, you move quickly in the water with high mobility. So take that for what it's worth. I wouldn't tailor your build around it, but but if you have some free upgrade points to put somewhere, don't discount mobility. It makes the traversal sections quicker, and you can avoid the first boss in the water way easier and touch the runes much faster. For the enemy sections of this traversal, you can invis past everything on a hunter. On Titan, just bonk a couple enemies to get restoration going and make your way through, and on Warlock, same thing if you are running Sunbracers. Playing too cautiously can actually get you killed. You can honestly run past most of these enemies. I have done it. For the parts with the wizards, Wishender one-shots them, so it is a godsend here. Revision 0 is also nice as well. I like to keep my Eager Edge sword on until right after this part, and then you can swap to a linear fusion rifle for the Shrieker, or just use Revision 0 and snipe it. Again, none of this is necessarily needed, but I'd hate to see you die to enemies here on a flawless run. Speaking of dumb ways to die, this jump killed me once because the shape of the ground ate my jump. So just be cautious here and jump from a little bit further back so that you don't lose your jump. Also, again, mobility makes this jump way easier. So those are a few little tips for the jumping encounter, and now on to the first boss. This boss is one beefy motherfucker, and he is aggressive, so you gotta bring survivability and DPS. I tested out a myriad of options, so I'll boil everything down into what I think is the best for overall damage while staying alive. Because great damage doesn't mean anything if it is too risky to do without dying. We are going for a solo flawless after all. So these strategies may not be the most optimal in terms of damage, and that is okay. Even if you have to 8 phase, the key is that you are staying alive. So first of all, we gotta get to DPS. So you need a great ad clearing build. You want an ability heavy build here so that you can save ammo for DPS. So once again, I recommend Sunbracers Warlock for easily clearing out the ads while always having restoration ×2 to basically be invincible. So you can literally just lob grenades to kill everything until you jump down into the water. From there, just hit your runes. If you're on PC, you can use TextChat to jot down the rune symbols. I did this on my flawless run just to be safe, but in all honesty, after having run this a bunch during testing, it is pretty easy to remember. A reason I recommend a few practice runs is to get your strategy down. And one thing that will really help is knowing where the runes are down low. On screen now is the layout for the map for this room. I didn't have this when I ran it, but it should be helpful. Once you get used to the layout though, you can very quickly get to the runes and get to damage. It often took me just 2 minutes to hit damage on my Titan, so the more you run it, the better you will get. So if you don't want to run a Sunbracers Warlock, then the only other decent option would be Controverse Hold with Devour in my opinion. Devour is mandatory for staying alive during the fight, though personally, I prefer Restoration over Devour. So let's talk about DPS. You have to kill the 3 wizards, and once you finish its ghost, you have 1 minute and 20 seconds to deposit that in a statue around the room. Once you do this 3 times, damage will start. From the moment you dunk the 3rd one, you have 5 seconds until the knight spawns in. Once he spawns in, damage starts. You want to kill this knight as fast as possible so you can take down the boss's light infused shield. Tip number 1, Arbalest will one-shot this shield. However, I think Arbalest is bad to use because exotic heavies go very hard in this fight. So use it if you like and have good special and heavy legendaries, but I don't think it is optimal. So what you want to do is drop the final vestige in the left or right statue because these are the closest, and then sprint to the front of the room to kill the knight as quickly as possible. Then get the boss's shield down as quickly as possible. You can leave the little green pool the knight spawns to break the shield, but you have to be fast. So I recommend breaking it from the pool. Depending on your class and loadout, each strat is different. So here's my overall recommendation. On Warlock only, I would recommend Legend of Acreus. This weapon chunks the boss, and you are pretty much invincible in a well. So you take down the knight and then place a well to do damage. The damage phase lasts exactly 40 seconds from when the knight spawns, so you want to kill the knight and then wait for the boss to rush you. At this point, you drop your well. Once the well runs out, do damage if it is safe. This is a nice strat because you can just focus on DPS. You don't have to run around reprocking Restoration or Radiant, you just have it all the time. So that would be my go-to strat for Warlock. I didn't do that in the background gameplay, I used Lament, and that also works decently here because it can heal you, but the hit detection can be a little weird. When I tested Acreus, I was on Titan and I was trying to proc Volt Shot, but that is a waste of time. It takes too much time to get the kill, reload, and then shoot the boss just to proc Jolt, and Jolt has also been nerfed. So you're much better off just trying to unload all your Acreus ammo and then do the same on the next damage phase. So again, in a Well of Radiance, this is the easiest time to do it. Also, if you have some weapons with the perk surrounded on it, be sure to throw them on. There are a ton of enemies in here, so it will pretty much always be procced. I think the Fortissimo kinetic shotgun could be a monster here because it is very easy to proc surrounded and kinetic weapons deal 15% more damage. I also have a solar sword with surrounded that works really nice, and you can use it to keep proccing your Radiant and Restoration with Ember of Empyrean. So if you happen to have a negative space from the Prophecy dungeon, be sure to try it out. For Hunter, I do not recommend Invis here. I think Solar Ophidia Spathe and Assassin's Cowl are much better. They have better damage output to get to your DPS phases more quickly. On Ophidia Spathe, I used the aforementioned sword with Arbalist and it fared pretty well. And on Arc Hunter, I used Gathering Storm to help bring down the shield, and then Tractor Cannon and a 1-2 punch shotgun. This combination worked extremely well. You just have to go kill an ad every once in a while to get your health back and keep combination blow ×3 going. This would be my recommended Hunter strat. You can also use the seasonal artifact mods to make Arc Hunter even stronger, and Amplified will get you to the night in a hurry, allowing you to get a full damage phase in. And Tractor Cannon is nice for the debuff. And then we have Titan. The strat I used in my solo flawless was Parasite with 2 shotguns. The hammer is used for ad clear and you have to bonk a couple enemies during DPS. But the strat was awesome. I would use Parasite to one-shot the boss's shield, and then I would cast Burning Maul. This with Roaring Flames ×3 and Synthos does huge damage. And then I would have a holster mod on to reload Parasite, and then swap between my 2 shotguns and a Parasite. If done perfectly, it is a 4 phase. I messed up 1 phase so I did it in 5, but this strat can be used on every character. But it is easiest on Titan thanks to how easy it is to stay alive with Soul Invictus and Ember of Empyrean being up constantly. But the real strat you want to use if you are on Titan is much easier. Tractor Cannon, Syntheseps, Roaring Flames ×3, and the Bonk Hammer. I 3-phased doing this strat and it wasn't even fully optimized. It was my first time trying it and then I lost the checkpoint on my Titan. So that is a strat you want to go with. Again, I will detail all the builds more at the end of the video, but that strat is super consistent, safe, and powerful. So that definitely gets my recommendation for Titan. A couple other things I tried were Xenophage with Actium War Rig and Grand Overture with the Techian Force Fusion Rifle with Controlled Burst from the Last Wish raid. Xeno wasn't great, but that Grand Overture and Techian strat worked really nicely. If you have a God Roll of the Fusion Rifle with Rewind rounds and Controlled Burst, then that could definitely be a way to go. I also tried Sunbracers and a rocket launcher. Do not use rockets here, you will likely die. So to quickly recap, get your best ability centric build for ad clear so your weapons can DPS. Mobility is good for moving through the water, learn where their symbols are and know your routes, dunk the last totem at the left or right so you have less distance to run when DPS starts, and use a safe but powerful DPS strategy. Simple, right? On Titan, use Bonk Hammer, Hunter, 1-2 punch Arc Strider, Warlock, Sunbracers with Well of Radiance. From there, we move to the next transition section. I forgot to record my Hunter running through it, but throw on 100 mobility and invis with 6 Coyote and you can literally run through it from start to finish. On my Warlock, I used Wishender and Starfire Protocol and took my time killing the ads, and then popped a well at the end to kill all the enemies. And Titan, I just ran through bonking everything in sight. The big thing here to be wary of is that wizards will spawn behind you. And if you are trying to play safe, this will catch you. I was trying to play slow and safe and forgot about this, and then I panicked and popped my super and I went to throw my hammers at them, but I had forgotten to swap off Burning Maul, and I just spun my way into the pit of death. And this was on a flawless attempt. So yeah, what a stupid way to die. So learn from my mistake, please. If you want to go slow and kill everything, remember that the wizards will spawn behind you. And that brings us to the final boss. Again, I tested many different loadouts and strategies here, and healing is the most important element. Void can be decent with Devour for sure, but my recommendations are Solar Well of Radiance Warlock, Solar Bonk Titan, and Arc Assassin's Cowl Hunter. I found Warlock was the slowest to get to damage phase, but it is pretty easy once you are there thanks to Well of Radiance. That being said, the damage phase is 45 seconds, so it will not last for the whole phase. I would recommend proccing Radiant right before the damage with Ember of Torches for a 25% damage bonus, and then after a few shots or when ads close in, pop your Well. For Hunter, the big advantage is you are almost guaranteed not to die. You can go invis with ease and get your health back, and the jolt from the combination blow punches is amazing for ad clear. I literally had combination blow ×3 for the entire fight because of how many ads there are. Seriously, when I ran this, I was amazed at how easy it was to clear the battlefield and how calm the boss fight felt. It was amazing. However, the huge downside to Arc Hunter is that you don't have access to a buff or debuff. Solar has Radiant and Void has Weaken, so you are going to have the easiest time getting to damage, but your damage will suffer as a result. And that brings us to Titan. Titan has great ad clear and survivability. It is probably the best for taking out the 3 Lucent Hive as well. It is all around just wonderful. And the Hammer Super is great for taking the boss shield down, and then you can focus on DPS. And if you get lucky, ads will run into your sunspot and die, which keeps your Radiant buff going. I couldn't find the one clip, but I had one amazing phase where I had Radiant up most of the time. That being said, the sketchy part with Titan is you want to keep some of the ads alive. It allows you to proc Radiant, and off the bat it gives you biotic enhancements to buff your super damage to take down the shield. Where with the other characters, I would suggest clearing the entire battlefield before starting DPS. So you get somewhat inconsistent damage phases with Titan, but you also have the highest damage potential. So those are the build recommendations. Now let's talk loadouts. In my opinion, on a solo, there are 3 viable loadouts to run. The safest, I think, is Izanagi and a bait and switch Cataclysmic. Why is it safe? Because Izanagi is wonderful for taking out the Lucent Hive, especially the Knight. The other 2 aren't too threatening, but the Knight is scary, so I like to kill it from afar. You don't have to, but if you want to be safe and get it done flawless, you probably want to not bonk it. Cataclysmic does good damage and has amazing ammo economy, so you'll never hurt for ammo with this loadout. And finally, I use the Callus mini tool for shooting the moths and proccing Ember of Empyrean to keep Restoration and Radiant up. Additionally, you could run Arbalest instead of Izanagi for one-shotting the boss's shield. I actually think that is probably the better option, as Izanagi swapping can be a bit annoying in this fight because you are under duress. The next loadouts cannot use Arbalest because we have exotics for our heavies. The first weapon is a monster which I absolutely love, and that is Leviathan's Breath. It hits like a truck and has wonderful ammo economy. However, its DPS suffers greatly if you miss crits because you lose Archer's tempo, which greatly decreases the draw speed, and the boss flails around a lot. I should mention that you want the catalyst for Leviathan's Breath. I used it in my team runs, but my damage was inconsistent and it was very frustrating. Something I found super consistent damage with, however, was Sleeper Simulant. The amazing thing about Sleeper is that unlike other linears, it doesn't lose a ton of damage when you miss a crit, and that is huge on this boss. I got extremely consistent damage using this. Again, you also want the catalyst done for Sleeper. The drawback is the total damage output. At base, it only holds 13 shots. I would rally the flag with 3 solar reserves on so that I could hold 16. It has a mag of 4, so this is 3 reloads and a damage phase. You want to run Solar Loader on your gloves, and you also want to have a hot swap loadout ready for after damage with Solar Scavenger and Solar Reserve so that you can top back up between phases. Trust me, if you do all this, you can 4-phase this boss with good damage phases, and it is easier than you think to do. You can dip into the water to hide from enemies and swap your loadout here. I did it and it worked great. I would pair it with the Kinetic Sniper Rifle Succession in case I got all my shots out with Sleeper and there is still time left for DPS. Overall, this would be my suggested loadout. A good kinetic sniper, something like an SMG to shoot moths, and Sleeper Simulant. It honestly works wonders and it's super consistent. So we've covered builds and loadouts. Next is some helpful tips. First and most importantly, after DPS and after you line up the Taken King symbols, the boss will spawn in a shit ton of moths. Make sure you shoot these. If you don't, you will die. Unless you are an Invis Hunter. They can hide. But you really want to deal with these as soon as she spawns them in. The moths are deadly and will be the #1 thing that fucks up your flawless run. Next, and this goes for the whole dungeon, run 100 resilience. The damage resistance will keep you alive when your health is low. These encounters are extremely enemy dense, so sacrifice other stats to get 100 resilience. Next, I mentioned mobility for moving through the water, but you can sprint before hitting the water to boost yourself through. It's not a huge deal, but I figured I'd mention it. Most people will probably take around 6 phases with this boss, so it's definitely a war of attrition more than anything else, so take the little time gains where you can get them. Learn the map and the boss fight. You can choose where you want to DPS from. How? By taking the rune where you want to DPS from last. On my Titan, I always wanted to DPS in mid because ads will file in there, which would help me to keep Radiant and Restoration re-proccing. But I could also shield myself in Oryx's chest from the boss depending where she was floating. So I would always choose the chest rune last, and I would pop super right before I cleansed it, that way I wasted no time for DPS. Those small things will make a difference over the course of a very long boss fight. One big tip too is if you grab the wrong rune and you haven't gotten the other ones yet, you can actually replace that vestige. as long as you kill the other Lucent Hive before the timer runs out. It will replace it with the new vestige. And speaking of those symbols, another crucial thing is to remember them. Dunking on the wrong spot will result in a wipe, so do whatever you have to remember the symbol. So if you forget a symbol, you can do the process of elimination if you go to kill the other one to replace that vestige and remember that symbol. It kind of sounds confusing, but it's really not. However, you only have a minute to swap vestiges, so you have to be fast. Next, we have ammo economy. If you have 15 shots in your sleeper and see a brick, don't pick it up for one more shot. You can just leave it there for the next phase. With solar scavengers, you will get 6 shots with a brick pickup. Again, this will make a huge difference over the course of a run. If you have a ton of bricks on the ground, then sure, grab it. But you always want to go into damage phases with full ammo. If you want a safe and secure clear, I would say go with a hunter. Seriously, I was shocked how chill the parts leading to DPS were on my hunter. It was so calm and slow paced. If you want a fast clear, 100% go Titan. You can easily 4-phase, if not 3-phase the first boss with the tractor hammer method, and a 4-phase is possible on the last boss with sleeper and solid DPS phases. And if you are a Warlock main, well, sorry, but I think you have the worst class for clearing this dungeon solo flawless. Not that it can't be done, of course it can, but I'm a Warlock main, and I found it the most tedious and difficult on my Warlock. So next, I'm going to cut away and go over the recommended builds I have for this dungeon. Many work, but I will only focus on the ones that I would use if I were solo flawlessing on that character. So Voidwalker and Night Stalker and Ophidia Spathe Hunter, while those are all good and very viable, I won't detail them as this video is already getting very long as it is. So this is the Warlock build that I recommend. It's the Sunbracers build. Also, I have it as a pre-save, but for some reason my transmog doesn't carry over when I swap my loadouts. See, there's the robes that I should have, but there's the robes that it switches to. So it's not switching over. I don't know if anyone's experienced that. If you have, let me know that in the comments. But anyways, you want Well of Radiance. I run Incinerator Snap to get easy solar melee final blows to proc the Sunbracers. Solar Grenades, of course. Phoenix Dive with Touch of Flame. With Heat Rises. Pretty much allows you to chain this non-stop and have restoration times 2 pretty much indefinitely as long as you're getting solar kills from the air. I made a build breakdown of the whole gameplay loop if you need more context, but yeah, this pretty much makes you unkillable even in that final boss room. I've gotten to DPS phase a ton of times, so I do know it works. Ember of Torches, powered melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies radiant. So this will just give you radiant a lot of the time, which is really good for final boss phase because like I said, it's 45 seconds, so your well won't last that entire time. Ember of Solace, you'll get longer radiant and restoration effects, which is very important because we're trying to output good damage. Ember of Empyrean, this will extend your radiant and restoration with any solar final blows, so your grenade final blows will extend that. And then Ember of Resolve, just solar grenade final blows cure you. You can put whatever you want here, but again, we're going for safety because this is solo flawless. So you want to be as safe as possible and not die, and this will help you stay alive. And then this was the one loadout that I mentioned. So Arbalest to break the boss's shield, this to shoot all the moths and keep proccing Ember of Empyrean to keep your restoration and radiant going. And then I should have boss spec on this, but I didn't. But yeah, you want 4th times and bait and switch, ideally with 6 in the mag, so you have to reload less. And then I don't have it on here because they took intrinsic fastball away from Sunbracers with the latest update to this new season. I'm not sure what's up with that. But if you did have room, I like running bolstering detonation to get class ability energy, and you obviously need firepower to make orbs. But another thing that would be nice to run is a solar loader, and then you want 3 times solar weapon surge. 2 time dilation and a charged up will allow you to have solar surge for the entire boss fight, provided you make an orb roughly right before the boss fight begins. And then everything else is kind of whatever you want. I have Ashes to Assets on the helmet, and then of course arc damage resistance because there's a ton of arc resist in that final boss. So that is the Warlock build. So here's the Hunter build. I dubbed this the Ad Clear Assassin. It's absolutely amazing, and like I mentioned, I have the wrong gloves on because something's going on with transmog when I swap loadouts. But anyways, You want Gathering Storm Super. This helps you take the boss shield down very quickly at the start of DPS. I like Pulse Grenades, but a Flux Grenade would be good for boss damage if you want to chuck it at the boss. Lethal Current and Flow State, these are the two must-haves for your aspects. I didn't mention that on the Warlock either, but obviously you want Touch of Flame as the other one to make your solar grenades do more damage. Spark of Resistance, while surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage, huge for survivability. Defeating a jolted target creates an ionic trace, that's just nice to have, and everything's jolted because of how these work with your punch. Spark of Shock, your arc grenade jolts targets, and this will make your arc grenade last longer. So this is another build I talked about. So Succession is really nice for additional damage when you pair it with Sleeper Simulant, but it's also good paired with Leviathan's Breath and good for taking down the Lucent Hive. And then I run a 1-2 punch shotgun. I would recommend, again, an SMG for shooting the moths, but I got to DPS phase a whole bunch of times, and you can literally just go invis and wait for those moths to hit the hive. And then when you jolt everything and those moths come off, the jolt actually destroys the moths. So if there's one loadout where you can run double special, it would be this hunter build, because Assassin's Cowl will make you invisible on your powered melee final blows. So all you have to do is just proc that when the wizard is spawning in her moths, and they won't come find you. Again, this is very consistent, but for safety's sake, I would say just to have an SMG on you, or you could even put it here, because Leviathan's Breath can last for the whole damage phase, unlike Sleeper. Sleeper runs out of shots, but Leviathan's Breath, you could get off all 15 shots. So you don't necessarily need a sniper. You could run an SMG here, 1-2 punch shotgun, or vice versa, however you want to run it. And then of course, you want triple Void Surge on the boots so that you're doing the most damage possible. Again, a charged up and 2 time dilations will last you for the entire damage phase. You need heavy-handed to make final orbs from final blows with your melee. And then I like Impact Induction to reduce my grenade cooldown. So that is the arc build on Hunter. Again, 100 resilience is key, and arc resist is important. And finally, we have what I think is really the best loadout in the game, but also the best loadout for solo flawlessing this dungeon, and that is the Solar Titan build. Burning Maul for that first boss, as I detailed, with Tractor Cannon and Bonk Hammer. But for the final boss, you want Hammer of Soul for taking down that shield, Bonk Hammer for killing everything, Healing Grenades if you're in a pinch, even though Soul Invictus will spawn sunspots, which give you restoration, Roaring Flames, so your Bonk Hammer does more damage, Ember of Torches, powered melee attacks give you Radiant, so you're always using your hammer, so you pretty much always have Radiant. Again, Ember of Solace for longer Radiant to help us output more damage during DPS phase. This one is just whatever, and Ember of Empyrean to continue proccing Restoration and Radiant. This for shooting the moths, and like I said, extending Ember of Empyrean. This for if your Sleeper Simulant runs out. And again, what I think is the best heavy damage option for this boss. One thing I didn't really mention was Xenophage, but I know it also absolutely slaps on this boss and is extremely easy to use and super user friendly. So that's also another really good solar option. Again, it takes forever to load, so you're going to want Solar Loader on here. I did have Solar Loader, but there it is. So yeah, you want Solar Loader, and then hands-on on the helmet, of course, just to get your super back quicker. I actually ran triple resistances because I had the room, because the Acolytes shoot Void, the boss obviously shoots a ton of arc, and the Acolytes throw those little solar grenades. So really whatever you want, but definitely have arc resist. Again, 100 resilience, 3 solar weapon surges. I didn't have charged up, but 3 time dilations does the same thing and gets me easily through the boss damage phase. So that is the Titan build. And that is pretty much it for the tips and tricks I have for the entire dungeon. I hope everything I learned from my testing helps to give you some ideas on how you want to approach this solo flawless. Personally, I found Duality more difficult. Its mechanics were far less forgiving as you were working under a timer a lot, where these ones are much more relaxed. However, in Duality, you had to do those mechanics less because the bosses were weaker. The bosses in here are literally as strong as raid bosses. I think they are definitely a little overtuned. I think both should probably have about 2 million less health. Reduce their health by about 15%, and this would be one of my favorite dungeons to run solo and with a fire team. But anyways, that is going to do it for the video. Again, I hope these tips and tricks helped you, and if they did, please leave a like on the video. And if you want more helpful Destiny 2 content, consider subscribing. And finally, if you made it this far, then thanks so much for watching to the end. This video took a shit ton of time and effort, so I hope it helps you accomplish a solo flawless. Good luck with your runs, and take care.